By 1943, the Allied command stood before a strategic dilemma, both obvious and absolutely vital. Following the hard-won victories in North Africa, the next logical objective was the invasion of Italy. The Allies recognized the necessity of striking at the soft underbelly of Europe to force Italy's collapse, draw German forces away from the Eastern Front, and open a crucial new theater of operations against the Wehrmacht. The ideal location for the initial invasion was Sicily, Operation Husky. Geographically, it was the logical choice, close to established Allied bases in Tunisia and Malta, and its capture would secure control of the vital Mediterranean shipping lanes. The problem, however, lay precisely in this very obviousness. The German High Command, including Adolf Hitler himself, was keenly aware of Sicily's strategic value. German intelligence, the Abwehr, and military analysts were certain that the invasion would land exactly there. This certainty had transformed Sicily from a theoretical soft target into a heavily fortified bastion. By early 1943, Axis forces, comprising elite panzer divisions, well-entrenched infantry, and massive anti-aircraft defenses, were thoroughly prepared for the inevitable invasion. Had the Allies proceeded with Operation Husky without any attempt at strategic deception, they would have faced a brutal, frontal assault that could have resulted in catastrophic casualty rates and potentially delayed the opening of a second European front for years. The most pessimistic forecasts suggested that the operation could easily turn into a second Gallipoli. To give the invasion any reasonable chance of success, the Allies required something far beyond conventional military force. They needed the greatest strategic lie in military history. The objective was clear: convince Hitler not that they would not attack Sicily, but that they would attack somewhere else, and that this somewhere else would be so strategically compelling that Hitler would commit his critical reserves, fatally weakening Sicily's defenses. This immense task fell upon the shoulders of an elite, deeply secretive British intelligence unit known as the 20 Committee, or the XX Committee, dedicated entirely to deception operations. Early plans discussed were either too complex, too easily discernible, or lacked the necessary psychological hook. What was needed was a vector of deception that would bypass all standard levels of German military intelligence, penetrate the bureaucracy, and appeal directly to the ego and intuition of Adolf Hitler, who was known for his tendency to discard the advice of his generals when it conflicted with his own strategic hunches. The entire plan hinged on successfully manipulating the Führer's notorious self-confidence. Within the deep recesses of British naval intelligence, a concept emerged that its very architects conceded bordered on the absurd, yet possessed a unique possibility of success precisely because of its very outrageousness. This was the idea conceived by Charles Cholmondeley: the use of a corpse to deliver forged documents. The plan was deceptively simple and psychologically brilliant. The German Abwehr would never suspect that the British would rely on such a primitive and high-risk delivery method for critical strategic documents as an ordinary courier killed at sea. It was too careless, too un-British. Yet this very carelessness was intended to cement the document's authenticity. The corpse was to serve as the perfectly innocent carrier, a victim of a tragic accident who could never be interrogated or exposed. The false targets for the invasion had to be profoundly plausible. The chosen targets were Sardinia and Greece, specifically the Peloponnese. Both locations held genuine strategic value. Sardinia offered a potential stepping stone for an invasion of southern France, while Greece offered a pathway to open a Balkan front. Both targets were significantly more challenging to invade than Sicily, making them the ideal deceptive targets. They looked like the more difficult but strategically superior choice the Allies might logically make. The initial choice of the false target was critical. If the Germans suspected forgery, they would not merely ignore the documents. They would reinforce Sicily even further, preparing for a likely feint. The entire plan hinged on ensuring the false documents appeared to be the consequence of a genuine, random catastrophe, rather than a piece of deliberately complex strategic deception. This was the first engineering challenge of Operation Mincemeat, constructing a multi-layered lie that had to look exactly like the plain, unadorned truth delivered by a dead courier. The preparation for the operation, which would forever be known as Operation Mincemeat, began in the deepest secrecy, involving only a handful of key individuals from MI5 and MI6. They faced not only logistical challenges, but profound ethical and forensic obstacles. How does one acquire the right corpse? How do you ensure it appears to have died in an air crash? Most critically, how do you construct a deeply compelling legend of fake past, personal attachments, and trivial habits that would convince even the most suspicious German analyst of the genuine existence of Major William Martin? Operation Husky was scheduled for July 1943. Time was running critically short. The success or failure of the entire invasion, and potentially the outcome of the war in the Mediterranean, now depended on whether British spies could successfully sell Hitler the incredible story of a dead courier who never actually existed. The most unbelievable, high-stakes deception game in the history of intelligence had begun. Operation Mincemeat transcended the conventional bounds of espionage. It was an intricate, multi-layered problem of applied social engineering, where the final object of manipulation was not enemy steel or code, but human perception, culminating in the mind of Adolf Hitler. The intellectual genesis of the plan belonged to Charles Cholmondeley, an RAF intelligence officer. But the man who was tasked with transforming this absurd vision into a tangible reality was Ewan Montague, a naval intelligence officer and lawyer by peacetime profession. Montague and Cholmondeley were an improbable yet perfect partnership. Cholmondeley was the visionary, the generator of unorthodox, outlandish ideas. Montague was the meticulous, legally trained pragmatist who possessed the ability to take a wild concept and imbue it with ironclad, forensically sound plausibility. Their core task was to construct a flawless, multi-layered lie that would successfully withstand the scrutiny of every level of the Abwehr. The entire operation rested on a single, crucial psychological principle. The Germans are programmed to look for complexity. If the documents had arrived via captured double agent or through decrypted signals intelligence, the Abwehr would have been instantly on guard. But delivered via the accident of an officer killed at sea, the suspicion would be significantly reduced. The key insight was that no one would believe that the fate of the most important invasion operation depended on a dead man. Montague immediately understood that the success of the operation would be determined not by the documents themselves, but by the irrefutable context in which they were found. The primary document, the intended leak, was to be a letter from the Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, VCIGS, Lieutenant General Archibald Nye, addressed to General Harold Alexander, the Commander-in-Chief of the Middle East Ground Forces. This letter was deliberately crafted not as a direct operational order, but as a private, personal, and highly confidential communication between two trusted, high-ranking friends, casually discussing strategic plans. Had the letter been a formal directive, its high security classification would have made its presence in the hands of a simple courier unbelievable. But a personal letter, containing chatter about impending operations, lent itself perfectly to the narrative of a regrettable but entirely plausible carelessness. Within this letter, Nye was to inform Alexander that the invasion of Sicily, Operation Husky, was merely a feint or a humbug designed to mask the true principal objectives. Sardinia, codenamed Operation Brimstone, and Greece, codenamed Operation Barclay. This was the perfect multi-layered lie. The Germans already recognized Sicily as the obvious target. They would readily believe that it was being used as a cover for something strategically more ambitious. Montague's engineering precision was immediately applied to the material aspects of the deception, crafting the scenario of death. The corpse had to look like a victim of an air crash at sea. This would explain the absence of a parachute and the lack of flight logs. The death had to be convincingly accidental. Establishing authority. To imbue the documents with maximum weight, they had to be securely fastened and linked to a British officer of appropriate rank. The corpse was to be secured to a briefcase containing the documents by a robust chain, as was standard procedure for wartime couriers, and dressed in the authentic, if slightly worn, uniform of a staff officer. The logistics challenge. The drop location was crucial. The body had to be recovered precisely off the coast of Huelva, Spain. Spain, though officially neutral, harbored strong pro-Axis sympathies, and the area around Huelva was known to be the operational base of a highly effective Abwehr agent. The certainty was that the Spanish authorities would recover the body, pass the documents to the Abwehr for examination, and then, maintaining their veneer of neutrality, return the documents to the British. This intricate plan was the only way to ensure the Germans received the sensitive information without the British ever betraying their knowledge of the leak. Central to the entire operation, and the object of Montague's most meticulous work, was the construction of the legend, the personality of Major William Martin. If the Germans doubted the authenticity of the officer, they would inherently doubt the authenticity of his documents. Therefore, the subsequent and most critical phase involved constructing the life of a man who never existed, yet had to be absolutely, convincingly real. The darkest and most complex undertaking of Operation Mincemeat was the acquisition and preparation of the material, a human body that perfectly met the demands of the fictional legend. The corpse could not merely exist. It had to appear as a man who had died recently at sea from an accident, specifically without any telltale signs of violence or foul play that might suggest murder or a deliberate intelligence operation. The forensic aspect was paramount, demanding medical precision to support the narrative. The requirements for the body were strict. Cause of death. Death had to be due to natural causes, entirely unrelated to trauma or poisoning that might suggest the officer was eliminated to cover the leak. Post-mortem condition. The body had to be in a state where a forensic medical examiner would conclude that death occurred shortly before entering the water, and that the body had subsequently been at sea for no more than a few days. This timeline was essential to the air crash scenario. Age and physique. The age had to correspond believably with the rank of captain or acting major, roughly 30 to 35 years old. Through the quiet efforts of the chief pathologist to the Home Office, Sir Bernard Spilsbury, who served as a confidential medical consultant to the operation, a suitable body was located. It was that of Glyndwr Michael, a 34-year-old Welsh vagrant who had recently died in St. Pancras Hospital in London from pneumonia, likely brought on by the ingestion of rat poison. The medical officer responsible for the immediate handling of the body was Dr. Bentley Purchase. He performed a discreet autopsy, concluding that Michael's death was due to pulmonary edema, fluid in the lungs, and heart failure stemming from chemical poisoning. Crucially, Dr. Purchase was able to confirm that the physical changes observed in Michael's lungs were almost identical to the changes that would occur if a person had drowned. This was a forensic stroke of genius, a death by natural causes that perfectly mimicked the external signs of a death by accident at sea. The context of Glyndwr Michael's life was also ideal for the deception. Being a vagrant, he had no immediate next of kin who would identify him and raise inquiries, ensuring absolute secrecy for the entire operation. His body was immediately preserved in a deep freeze unit, necessary to maintain the forensic timeline that the subsequent medical examiners would observe. Montague and his team dedicated painstaking effort to studying the expected decomposition and appearance of the body after days in seawater. They calculated how the skin should appear, the minimal amount of water that should be present in the lungs, to simulate drowning without raising suspicion, and even the precise stitching of the uniform to appear properly worn but not carelessly maintained. The body was now ready to become Major Martin. It was transferred discreetly from the morgue to a secure military refrigeration unit. There, under constant security, the body was meticulously dressed in the uniform of the Royal Marines. Major Martin was fitted with a greatcoat, high boots, and gloves, a necessary step to make the body appear to be part of a downed aircraft crew and to slow the rate of decomposition during the lengthy sea voyage. The medical deception was so thorough that when the Spanish and German forensic experts conducted their own separate autopsies, they arrived at the exact conclusion cited by the British: death by hypothermia leading to drowning. Dr. Purchase had successfully defeated the obver in the autopsy room, ensuring the foundational plausibility of the entire operation. Operation Mincemeat was thus confirmed as an exercise in forensic engineering, where the most minute medical and biological details were meticulously utilized to construct an utterly convincing strategic lie. With the material basis secured, the body, Montague pivoted to the engineering of the critical document. The forged strategic letter designed to fool not just German intelligence, but Adolf Hitler himself. This stage demanded a profound balance between absolute conviction and deliberate, plausible sloppiness. The primary document, intended to be the treasure recovered by the obver, was the personal letter from the Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, VCIGS, Lieutenant General Archibald Nye, to General Harold Alexander, Commander-in-Chief of the Middle East Forces. The rationale behind choosing a personal letter over a formal operational order was critical. The psychological hook. Formal orders are easily forged and would instantly alert suspicion. A private letter between two high-ranking military figures known to be close created the powerful illusion of a casual confidence, a regrettable breach of security not intended for external consumption. The Germans were meant to believe they had intercepted something that was not meant to be lost. Lowering the security tier. A courier with only the rank of major would not be entrusted with the highest level operational order. However, he could plausibly carry a personal letter that incidentally touched upon top-secret information. This perfectly explained why Major Martin, rather than a higher-ranking officer, was the courier. Within the letter, Nye was to inform Alexander that the invasion of Sicily, Operation Husky, was merely a humbug or a feint designed to mask the true principal objectives, which would constitute the real blow. Sardinia, Operation Brimstone, and Greece, Operation Barclay. The engineering details of the letter were meticulous. Paper and ink. Authentic VCIG stationery with the correct watermark was used. The signatures and seal of General Nye were flawlessly reproduced. Crucially, the ink was formulated to be water-soluble, allowing it to subtly bleed and soften without completely dissolving in the seawater. This gave the documents the convincing appearance of being damaged but readable. The security element. A small, genuine-looking cryptographic security code was applied to the letter. This was included to assure the obver that the document had indeed passed through the official British security system. The code, however, was incomplete and could not be successfully decrypted by the Germans. Yet its mere presence validated the document's authenticity. The deliberate flaw. Montague intentionally included a small, plausible inaccuracy in dates or geographical references within the letter. This was calculated to allow the German analysts to discover the error, giving them a false sense of intellectual triumph, a psychological hook that made them feel they had successfully verified and corrected a genuine piece of intelligence. The key element that sealed the deception was the manner in which the documents were packaged. They were placed within a hermetically sealed briefcase, which was then secured to Major Martin's wrist by a thin stainless steel chain. This specific choice of metal, stainless steel, was deliberate, chosen because it would not rapidly rust in the seawater, ensuring that the critical evidence remained firmly attached. The briefcase itself was almost as vital as its contents. Montague sourced an old, worn leather briefcase, ensuring it bore scuff marks, fingerprints, and minor blemishes consistent with an officer who traveled frequently. The construction of this document and its container was a multi-month endeavor where every millimeter of paper, every trace of ink, and every scuff on the leather briefcase was precisely engineered to create the illusion of carelessness that concealed the war's most complex strategic lie. The single most pivotal element guaranteeing Operation Mincemeat's success was not the strategic document, but the meticulously constructed identity of Major William Martin. Montague and his team understood that German intelligence would conduct a comprehensive background check on the courier before validating the contents of the briefcase. A flawed or too perfect biography would instantly trigger suspicion. They set out to create a personality that was not a heroic spy, but an ordinary, slightly disorganized, yet conscientious staff officer, living a convincingly mundane life. The details were the weapon: personal documents. Martin was furnished with flawlessly forged identity cards and a military service record, complete with a photograph of the corpse, Glyndwr Michael, which had been taken just prior to the body's freezing. Financial affairs: the human flaw found in his pockets was a series of items confirming his human, financially vulnerable status. The most ingenious detail was the overdue bank overdraft notice from Lloyd's Bank. This single item achieved three crucial things. It confirmed his presence in London, it proved he was an ordinary man with mundane financial worries, and it added a powerful, relatable layer of human vulnerability that immediately disarmed German suspicion. The personal life, the love story. The most poignant and convincing element was the letters from his fiancée, Pam. Pam was, in fact, an MI5 secretary. The letters, written in a delicate hand on sentimental paper, were full of tenderness, but also contained plausible complaints about Martin's sudden departure. Crucially, one of Pam's letters mentioned that Martin had left a photograph of her behind, and she hadn't managed to mail it to him before he left. This provided a flawless explanation for the absence of a personal photograph on his body, a detail the Abwehr would certainly check. Entertainment and habits. His pockets contained convincing evidence of his recent life. 2 theater ticket stubs for a show recently playing in London, a receipt from a jeweler for the purchase of an engagement ring, and a pack of cigarettes and a full box of matches. These trivial, everyday items substantiated his status as an ordinary person, rather than a secretive operative. Montague and Cholmondeley meticulously ensured that Martin's uniform bore small, realistic signs of wear, and that his pockets contained a small amount of mundane pocket lint and crumbs, details that confirmed he was a person who had actively worn the uniform and lived a life leading up to his supposed accident. The entire legend was constructed so that the German analyst, upon studying the contents of Martin's pockets, would not see a spy. They would see a human being, distracted, in love, slightly in debt, but dedicated to his duty. It was into this human narrative, artfully constructed from lies, that the German experts were meant to project their trust, thereby silencing any lingering questions about the authenticity of the highly valuable strategic documents he carried. This remains the perfect historical example of sophisticated social engineering winning a strategic victory. Following the meticulous construction of Major Martin's life and the careful packaging of the critical documents, the operation entered its most physically challenging phase: the transport of the body to the precise drop-off point near Huelva, Spain. Why Huelva? The choice was deliberate and multifaceted. Geographical feasibility. Huelva is situated on the southwest coast of Spain, perfectly positioned within the likely flow of maritime currents that could plausibly carry a body from an Atlantic air crash. Pro-axis environment. Most critically, Huelva was the operational base for a highly effective German Abwehr agent. The British knew that the Spanish authorities, upon finding the body, would be strongly inclined to pass the contents of the briefcase to the Abwehr for study. The operation was executed with absolute military secrecy. On April 19, 1943, Major Martin's body, housed within a sealed steel container filled with dry ice for preservation, was covertly loaded aboard the submarine HMS Seraph. The Seraph was specifically chosen because its commanding officer, Lieutenant Bill Jewell, was fully briefed on the operation's sensitive nature and known for his absolute reliability and discretion. The Seraph departed from Scotland, navigating south, rounding Gibraltar, and proceeding to the coast of Spain. The voyage was long and fraught with tension. The majority of the submarine's crew remained completely unaware of the container's true contents, believing it to hold either highly sensitive meteorological equipment or a specialized navigational device intended for secret deployment. In the dark hours of April 30, 1943, the Seraph surfaced approximately 3 miles off the coast of Huelva. Under Lieutenant Jewell's direct supervision, the team performed the final, most solemn phase of the operation. Major Martin's body was carefully extracted from the container. He was fitted with a life vest, deliberately fastened incorrectly around his waist rather than his shoulders to suggest haste, and the briefcase chain was secured to his wrist. Before the body was committed to the sea, Jewell, adhering to the unusual protocols, read a passage from the 37th Psalm, a final, somber act of human dignity for the man who was about to become the war's most critical fabrication. The body was then gently pushed into the water. The steel container, now empty, was filled with explosive charges and sunk to prevent any possible trace evidence. The engineering of the drop, the logistical challenge extended beyond merely placing the body. The crew of the Seraph undertook efforts to simulate an air crash subtly. The submarine intentionally released a torpedo tube and generated small surface waves to lend credence to the air crash scenario, should any local witnesses, or the Abwehr, question the source of the body. With Major Martin now adrift, the final act of the operation began. The agonizing wait for the currents, the Spanish fishing fleet, and the actions of the German intelligence network. On April 30th, 1943, just hours after the body of Major Martin was released from the HMS Seraph, it was discovered by a Spanish fisherman, José Antonio Reyna, near the mouth of the Huelva River. Reyna immediately reported his discovery to the Spanish authorities. The Spanish officials, maintaining a careful veneer of neutrality, contacted the British vice consul in Huelva, Francis Hazelden. However, many of the local Spanish officials, whose sympathies lay openly with the Axis powers, simultaneously and discreetly informed the Germans of the unusual find. This was the precise operational nexus that Montagu and Cholmondeley had anticipated. The main Abwehr agent in Huelva, Adolf Klaus, codenamed Uncle Adolf, immediately took action. Knowing he could not simply steal the briefcase outright without compromising Spain's neutrality, Klaus utilized his extensive network of contacts within the Spanish military and police. The key sequence of events unfolded rapidly. The Spanish authorities retrieved the briefcase, and before formally returning it to the British consul, they executed the critical step planned by the British. They carefully opened the briefcase, extracted the documents, and provided copies to the Abwehr for analysis. The Spanish authorities later offered a plausible excuse to the British, claiming the briefcase had been accidentally damaged during the recovery process. The British consul, Hazelden, was under strict instructions to act with profound anxiety over the lost documents. He transmitted urgent telegrams to London, detailing the damaged nature of the documents and the suspicion that the Spanish had viewed them. This manufactured alarm was essential to the deception, ensuring that the Germans believed the documents were a genuine, devastating security breach that the British desperately wished to conceal. Klaus and his analysts in the Abwehr dedicated meticulous attention to every detail of the find. The verification of identity. The psychological hook. The Germans began by cross-referencing Major Martin's identity. They analyzed the contents of his pockets, the overdue overdraft notice, the theater ticket stubs, the receipt for the engagement ring, and the letters from Pam. The consensus among the German analysts was that Martin was a credible, ordinary officer, distracted, in love, and dedicated to his duties. This depth of personal detail completely nullified suspicions of him being a fabricated spy. The medical verification. Spanish and German forensic experts conducted a thorough autopsy. Their conclusion flawlessly supported the narrative seeded by Dr. Purchas: death by hypothermia and subsequent drowning. No evidence of foul play or murder was found. The examination of the documents. Finally, they analyzed the contents of the critical Nye letter. The subtle flaws introduced by Montague, the personal tone, the minor inaccuracies in dating, convinced the Abwehr that this was a genuine, albeit deeply regrettable, security lapse. Agent Klaus immediately forwarded the complete set of documents and his intelligence report to Berlin. The final, decisive step remained: convincing the highest levels of the Wehrmacht and, ultimately, Adolf Hitler himself. The receipt of the copied documents from Major Martin triggered a massive, high-stakes verification process within the German High Command, OKW, and the Abwehr. The entire fate of their southern front defense hung in the balance. The scrutiny was intense, yet the psychological groundwork laid by Montague proved resilient. The factors that secured belief: Hitler's personal bias. Hitler harbored a profound distrust of standard intelligence reports, often preferring to trust his own intuition or seemingly accidental intelligence. The documents, found through chance, perfectly aligned with his tendency to believe sensational leaks that confirmed his own preconceived notions. The psychological appeal of humbug. The letter referring to Sicily as a humbug, a feint, was a masterstroke. The Germans already knew Sicily was the logical target. The document convinced them it was too logical and merely a diversion for a more ambitious attack on Sardinia and Greece. This appealed directly to the German ego, making them feel they had successfully outwitted the Allies' obvious trap. The authenticity of the small things. The non-strategic personal items were the most potent weapons. The existence of the Lloyds Bank overdraft notice and the affectionate letters from Pam substantiated Martin's ordinary human existence. The Abwehr concluded that no rival intelligence service would expend such vast resources creating a convincing, flawed personal life for a mere courier if the documents were not genuine. The flaws they overlooked. The German analysis was so focused on the strategic content that they dismissed critical inconsistencies. They noted the lack of a waterproof document carrier, but attributed it to typical British carelessness. They ignored the unusual stainless steel chain linking the briefcase, failing to consider that it was deliberately chosen to resist corrosion. Upon receiving the comprehensive Abwehr report, the highest levels of the German command were convinced. The report was immediately placed before Hitler. Hitler, already predisposed to believe that the Allies would choose the more difficult but strategically significant targets, accepted the intelligence as fact. He famously declared to his generals, "We must assume that the attack will take place against Sardinia and the Peloponnese, Greece." He immediately ordered the diversion of critical forces, including panzer divisions, away from Sicily to reinforce the decoy targets. The elaborate lie had successfully breached the highest level of the enemy's strategic defense. The successful penetration of the German command structure by the documents of Major Martin led to an immediate, dramatic, and irreversible strategic shift that critically facilitated the success of Operation Husky. Hitler's personal directive, fueled by his absolute conviction in the authenticity of the accidental leak, resulted in the strategic redeployment of key Wehrmacht reserves far from the genuine invasion site. The consequences of the deception: diversion to Greece and the Balkans, Operation Barclay. This was the largest and most strategically significant diversion. Hitler routed the elite 1st Panzer Division and several battle-hardened infantry divisions to southern Greece. He was entirely convinced this was the primary Allied objective aimed at opening the Balkan front. Reinforcement of Sardinia and Corsica, Operation Brimstone. Significant additional forces were transferred to these islands, which were logically deemed the stepping stones for the subsequent mainland invasion of Italy. The result was the critical weakening of Sicily's defenses precisely at the moment the Allies were preparing their assault. The most dangerous, mobile reserves, the forces capable of launching a devastating counterattack against the landing beaches, were moved thousands of miles away to fortify areas that were never intended to be invaded. When the invasion of Sicily, Operation Husky, commenced on July 10, 1943, the resistance was fierce but fundamentally flawed. Italian forces often collapsed rapidly, and crucial German counterattacks were delayed, poorly coordinated, and lacked the necessary speed and power to eject the Allied forces. The element of surprise, despite the sheer scale of the operation, was absolute. The Germans, paralyzed by the deception, were unable to commit their forces decisively. The success of Operation Husky was staggering. The Allies achieved their objectives in 38 days, sustaining casualty rates far lower than predicted, and immediately securing the staging point for the invasion of mainland Italy. The lie crafted by Montagu and his team was, without question, the most effective weapon deployed by the Allies in the Mediterranean theater. The deception directly saved thousands of Allied lives, significantly reduced the duration of Operation Husky, and created the strategic conditions necessary for the subsequent collapse of the Axis position in Italy. The successful execution of this intricate, multi-layered operation stands as a testament to the profound power of sophisticated intelligence and social engineering to defeat pure military force. Following the resounding success of Operation Husky, confirmed by the minimal losses and rapid completion of the invasion, the British intelligence community began the meticulous process of ensuring the final, secure closure of Operation Mincemeat. They orchestrated a careful reverse narrative, sending false messages to the Spanish vice consul, feigning extreme distress over the security breach, and demanding the immediate return of the lost documents. This final layer of deception was crucial to confirm to the Abwehr that the British genuinely believed the documents were lost, solidifying the initial narrative of the tragic accident. The decades of secrecy. The identity of Major William Martin was held under the highest level of classification for decades. While the story of Operation Mincemeat became known after Ewan Montagu published his account in 1953, the true identity of the corpse was protected to safeguard the family of Glyndwr Michael. The ultimate verdict. The successful execution of Operation Mincemeat stands as a profound case study in the power of psychological warfare and meticulous detail. It proved that the most critical strategic problems can be solved not by technological superiority, but by constructing a more convincing lie. The success hinged not on the authenticity of the strategic documents, but on the meticulous fabrication of the courier's mundane life. The bank overdraft, the love letters, and the theater tickets. These microscopic human details were the crucial flaw that the German Abwehr, programmed to look for sophisticated espionage, entirely failed to detect. The legacy, the final and most poignant chapter of the story, unfolded years later. The identity of Glyndwr Michael was finally confirmed in 1996. The man who was once a nameless vagrant became Major Martin, the key figure in the most successful deception operation of the war. In 1998, a memorial plaque bearing his real name was placed on his grave in Huelva, Spain, next to the original inscription honoring Major William Martin, R.M. The operation, which began with a desperate gamble, ended with a quiet act of historical justice. Major William Martin, the man who never was, saved thousands of lives and fundamentally altered the course of the war in the Mediterranean. This operation remains the zenith of deception, the perfect proof that sometimes the most decisive component in the entire military arsenal is a carefully engineered lie.